So beauty is also reflected, going on from what we've been talking about, beauty is also expressed in terms of harmony and likeness. For harmony seeks unity either in the likeness of equal parts or in the proportion of unequal parts. And so you look at, for example, this church. It's the St. Vincent de Paul in Chicago. Father Matt and I were there 2 summers ago. And you look at, and you'll see this when we talk about church architecture or architecture and beauty next week. But you look at that sanctuary, that church, and everything. Does this thing have a pointer on it?
It does. Press the middle of the green.
Oh, look at that. Oh, it even flashes. That's even better. And then it goes off. Oh, there we go. All right, never mind. So when you look at the center, you have the sanctuary of the church in the center, and then everything going off to the right and to the left leads you into, because of its symmetry, leads you into the sanctuary. And so when you look at this, I mean, even the arches on the top are symmetrical. The shrines on either end is symmetrical. The shrines next to the altar, on either side of the altar, are symmetrical. The windows draw you in, and so on and so forth. And we'll hear more about that next week. But that symmetry, I mean, there's a deliberate attempt to have symmetry in churches, and architects designed it in that way, because what does that symmetry do? It draws you into the center of the action of the Mass. And so as you see that symmetry, it just kind of invites you to come in. And so that symmetry is important in art, and it's important in Augustine's theology of beauty as well, because what that symmetry does is it draws you into God. Okay? And so that harmony, he sees harmony in that symmetry and that likeness. Now, other people might see harmony in dissimilarity. But in terms of his theology of beauty, that's where he sees harmony. And in that harmonious relationship, once we enter into appreciate that harmony in beauty, we are drawn more, as I said, more and more into the image and likeness of God. And so order leads to beauty. It's everywhere, attested to nature as well as in art. And so when you look at a mountainscape, for example, there's a symmetry to that as well. You know, it seems random in terms of its shape, but a mountain looks like a mountain for a reason. A tree looks like a tree. There's symmetry in the way the tree grows. The water has a symmetry to it to the degree that it just lays there. You know, the grass grows up, and all of those things are in a harmonious relationship because they're all living out their form. They're all living out how they were created. And so if there was a tree hanging over sideways, most likely it would be dead. But if it wasn't, it would make the scene less beautiful because there's no symmetry there. It's not doing what a tree normally does, which is growing up, you know. So when you look at Mount St. Helens, I forget when that Mount St. Helens blew its top.
1980.
Wow, how'd you know that, Lori?
Good memory.
Wow, good memory is right. So when Mount St. Helens blew up in 1980, thank you. You know, before that, it was a beautiful mountain, much like that. And then the whole side of the mountain blew up. I mean, the force of the volcanic eruption just destroyed the mountain. And after that happened, after that event occurred, that mountain was much less harmonious, much less symmetrical, and therefore it was rendered less beautiful in the eyes of Augustine. And so all of these things, order, harmony, likeness, form, unity, all come together when we talk about beauty. In order, ultimately, all of those things come together in the third person of the Blessed Trinity, the Holy Spirit, because it's in the third person of the Blessed Trinity that Father and Son and Spirit come together. And so there's that harmony reflected in the Trinitarian relationship, which is really important to St. Augustine. And so, perfect order leads to peace. So when we see something that is ordered correctly, it allows us to be more peaceful because we don't have to fight that lack of symmetry in our vision, so to speak. And so when you look at that mountainscape, you just kind of sit there and go, wow, that's really beautiful. There's nothing in that mountainscape that leads us away from peace. There's a harmony that's represented in that mountainscape that just allows us to sit there and experience it as a peaceful setting. You call it a pastoral scene, because in that scene, we see everything coming together as it should. Form, harmony, unity, whatever. It all comes together, and that experience of all of those things coming together leads us to peace. When you see a volcano erupt, that's the opposite of peace. That's conflict, because that's not the way things ordinarily happen, But that is. That's the way it's meant to be. And so it leads to peace. And the peace of the body is a well-ordained equilibrium of all of its organs. So when you look at the way our body works, we have hearts, lungs, brains, spleens, stomachs, all the organs work together in harmony and in unity, and that's how we live. One of the things that we used to do when I was a kid, or you'd see it on TV in kind of the hippie generation, you'd see people, did you ever look at your hand and all the things that are going on in the prints in your hand, the nails growing, the hair growing on your knuckles, so on and so forth. And so people would just sit there and gaze at their hand. And while that was kind of at least in retrospect, it's kind of a funny thing to contemplate, there is a message in there that's of value, because we don't contemplate how miraculous our bodies are. Think of how many things come together for us to live. We're breathing in and out all the time. Our brain is processing information constantly. Our heart is pumping blood. We eat, we excrete, and we do everything in between, and everything works together in harmony and in peace. And so that realization of what our bodies are actually doing can only lead us to peace. And when our bodies don't work as they should, what happens? We have incredible tension, And so when we have something that happens to us that causes us tension, we recognize how much we take for granted the way our bodies work in harmony. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind. And he transitions that not only to our bodies, but even to something as integral as a society that lives in peace and in harmony. And so when you think about the early life of the church, and as revealed in the Acts of the Apostles, there was a church at that time that lived in harmony and peace. We hear time and again in the stories of Acts. Now, certainly there was conflict as well, represented in there as the church was born. But generally speaking, we hear about how people lived in peace with each other. They didn't own anything. Anything that they acquired, they placed on the floor in front of the apostles, and so on and so forth. And so there was at least that ideal of peace that is reflected in the Acts of the Apostles. And so that's another experience of peace that Augustine talks about. Ultimately, though, peace is a tranquility of order. So when all the things that are ordered come together and do what they're supposed to do, what they were created to do, that experience of peace is going to happen. And that experience of peace is going to lead us to love, and that experience of love is going to lead us to God. And so ultimately the aim of beauty in Augustine and in St. Thomas Aquinas is to lead us to God. Because the more beautiful we experience something, the more closer we get to experiencing God. And ultimately, as I said earlier, it leads us to the beatific vision, our union with God in heaven. And so there's a lot of sense that makes, even though the verbiage sometimes is difficult to process. So this child is actually about 6 years old now. But the whole body, for example, is more beautiful than the parts composing it. So again, when we talk about the organs, the hands, the feet, all the things that make up a human being, the whole of all of that coming together is more beautiful than the parts composing it. And so again, when we talk about ugliness in terms of somebody missing an arm or a leg or whatever the case might be, while that's not the perfect form, beauty is more than just that. Beauty is all of the parts coming together to form us and to bring us closer to the image of God. And no part of the body is created which does not contribute to its beauty. And so we may look at our bodies and say, oh, it's not perfect. You know, I'm overweight, or I've got gray hair in my beard, or whatever the case might be. And we'll say, ugh. Yeah, you too, George. Well, you had pink in there yesterday. So we might look at that and say, ugh, you know, it's ugly. But in Augustine's thinking, no part of the body has been created which doesn't contribute to its beauty. And so again, objectively, gray hair, black hair, red hair, whatever the case, who cares? You know, whether you can see perfectly or not, who cares? You know, ultimately, it's all related to the whole. And so there's beauty in all of those things coming together, even if they aren't perfect. Now, there's certainly more perfect beauty than others, but, and again, as we talked about, I mean, the closer you are to the form, the ideal form, the more beautiful you are. But there's beauty in everything, you know? As long as those things come together and contribute to the way the body works, it's rendered beautiful. And then without beauty, though, things couldn't be enjoyed or loved. I mean, so beauty is an integral part of the human existence. We can't experience love, we can't experience enjoyment, we can't experience happiness, peace, all of those things which help us to live a good life, we couldn't experience without an appreciation of beauty. And so that's an important factor. Now, as I said, ugliness is the absence of a form of a thing, or the absence of a form a thing should have, but as no being is formless, it has beauty insofar as it has form. So I suppose if we were born a blob, a shapeless, formless blob that wasn't able to do anything, well, first of all, we wouldn't be alive, but just imagine that we were. I mean, certainly that would be the probably lowest expression of beauty, because that's not what we're created to be, you know? And so, again, if we can try to divorce ourselves from the subjective value of ugliness and beauty, that makes a little bit more sense.